How can we have a prayerful approach to the holidays? That's the question we're going to be answering today on Flourish-Meant. I'm your host, Tina Yeager, and today I have a wonderful guest. I'm so delighted to talk with her every time I have the opportunity. Her name is Janet McHenry, and she has a long history of experience with really intentionally delving into prayer and covering her community in prayer. She fell into the practice of prayer walking 25 years ago. She began as a quest to learn how to have a praying lifestyle. Her newest book, Praying Personalities, helps readers find their natural prayer personality. So exciting, by examining the prayer styles of biblical people, their spiritual gifts, various ideas about personality, and then bulleted suggestions for developing a praying lifestyle. Welcome back, Janet. It's been a while, but I am so happy to have you again on Flourish-Meant.
This is such a pleasure, Tina. I always used to hang out with you. Thank you for having me.
Of course. And I can't wait to get started on this topic. We're facing the holiday season right now. How can
Mhm.
we begin to look at who we are and make our holidays customized and develop a prayerful approach with that?
It is always a concern, isn't it? I mean, because we often approach the holidays with lists, we approach the holidays with worries, with concerns about what Aunt Edna is going to do, right? All those kinds of things. But I think if we kind of flip that and decide that we're going to approach the holidays prayerfully, that we'll find that Jesus is glorified with that, and that our family lives can flourish in the midst of even the challenges that we might face.
Well, we're all different, and that is one of the great things about your book. It's a very unique way of looking at prayer. How can we accommodate one another's differences in making a prayerful approach to the holidays?
Right. Each of us has a different God-given personality, and, each of us is probably going to approach prayer differently because of that. As I began kind of studying prayer in the Bible, I noticed that the different praying people approached God differently. They had different personalities, and so their prayer lives were going to look different. For example, you have someone like Moses, and there's a 2-chapter conversation between Moses and God, and he's trying to talk God out of calling him to lead the people out of Israel. So that's kind of a cerebral approach, and many of us are going to have that sort of, cerebral approach to prayer. We want to approach faith rationally, give us the reasons, have understanding through God's word, praying in God's will. But others are going to be more emotive. They're going to be more emotionally kind of charged. Someone like Hannah, any woman, concerned about her children or the lack of having children. And one instance, we see her lamenting, and then in the very next chapter, she's praising God because of the answers that God has given her. So there's that kind of emotive kind of approach. And so some of us approaching the holidays we're going to feel weighed down, and so to take all of that to God in prayer and say, like, God, I'm concerned about this. So instead of like making the mental list of worries, instead we can approach God prayerfully. It may be that's as a worry comes up, I write down that worry or that concern and I stick it in a Christmas stocking. I'm giving it to Jesus. It's Jesus' Christmas stocking. I'm sticking it in there, or put it in a Jesus jar or something like that, and then just at the end of the holidays, go back and see what God did. That might work for someone who is more kind of emotionally charged, that need to be able to give those things up. But then some may be very devotionally oriented. And so they might want to look at reading through a Christmas devotional. We have friends who've written Christmas devotional books. I can think of a couple off the top of my head. And even reading a chapter for starting December 1st. Reading a chapter of Luke every single day. There are 24 chapters in Luke. Asking God to reveal to you, okay, so how is this going to help me become more close to you during this special holy season. Holidays are holy days, so we want to approach them with that sense of holiness. And then others are more physical in the way that they pray. We see that in the Bible. Those people who fasted, like Ezra and Nehemiah and Esther and Daniel. And so those people, maybe we want to see the holidays as a way to give something up. We do that at Lent time, but maybe we can give something up in our lifestyle. It doesn't necessarily have to be food. And so that's just kind of an offering. It's a prayerful offering in some kind of way. So, looking at biblical characters over the years, I began understanding that, I don't have to pray like my neighbor. My neighbor, she wants me to put on praise music and dance around the house. That's not me. That's not who I am. And then I have another friend who always says, Janet, you should just write out all your prayers, And I'm like, that's also not me. I'm more of a kind of a problem-solving prayer. And so as problems arise, God brings them to me. I pray succinctly, and I just hand them over to him. And I say, I trust you for them, God. As we're approaching the holidays, we might, each of us, approach them just a little bit differently, but we can incorporate prayer, and make that a priority in those days that are coming up soon.
So, how can people with different personalities learn to approach the way that we're different with thankfulness and gratitude for our differences in prayer as we're praying?
Right. Years ago when I was in my 30s, I studied a lot of the Christian personality books, and some people can take them, some people can leave them, and there are all kinds of different ways to kind of take a look at them. We need to approach them with the understanding that these are man-created, first off, whether we're looking at Greek temperaments or we're looking at some of the more modern kinds of personality assessments, they're man-created. But I think that those can be helpful, and they did help me. They helped me understand not only the strengths that I have, but also the weaknesses that I have, and to recognize those and to ask God, prayerfully, okay, I see, how I could become really depressed and a critical kind of person. I don't want to be like that, Lord. I have a family member, an older family member who's like that. I don't want to be like that. So recognizing that, and then asking God to, reveal to us specifically, what would be a more natural kind of praying style. And I have hundreds, literally hundreds of ideas in the book where I share with the reader, like, so if this kind of personality resonates with you, perhaps these particular strategies might feel natural. They might just feel like they just are part of your daily approach to life. So the book is meant to be freeing, in the sense that I'm not telling you what to do. I'm not saying, even though I'm a kind of fanatical prayer walker, I've abandoned that position a little bit, Tina, because I recognize, and I've had people tell me over the years, but Janet, I can't walk. I'm like, oh, so that was part of my understanding going into the book. So to instead of saying, well, you should do this or do that, say, think about how God has created you. Who are you? How do you naturally respond? What are your thinking processes? And then think about your spiritual gifts that God's given you, and how can all of that connect in certain kinds of praying practices that are going to work for you, not necessarily feel like just like your neighbor who has a prayer closet, and she says, oh, you need to have one too, and go there an hour every day. The book is meant to free people from those shoulds and coulds, shoulda, coulda, woulda, done it sort of a thing. But, to find out who you are, understand who you are, and then allow God to reveal what would be the best way to spend time with him. So I sort of let the reader off the hook. And then by the end of the book, I put her back on there, because we need to have a praying lifestyle. Mine might be different than what yours looks like, Tina, or any of the listeners, but we need to make sure that we are spending time with God and not feel like it's always an on the run kind of practice. So
I love that. And I love that that dovetails in with some of the pieces of holiday celebration
Mhm.
because our traditions are so different and they can be so customizable. We can fit prayer into all of our holiday traditions as they work for us while respecting what works for our neighbor as something that is good for
Right.
them and doing our own part. How can you begin to dovetail prayer into those holiday traditions and celebrating Jesus in those as part of what you do during this season?
I was thinking through a lot of different practices that families already might have. They already might have the practice of making an advent calendar. So instead of, thinking of various ways that children could receive even additional presents through this advent calendar, make it a prayer calendar. Okay, we're going to pray for Aunt Susie today, and we're going to pray for Uncle Steve tomorrow. And then the next day, we're going to pray for Grandma, and so to have that kind of an intentional practice instead of like, what more can I get out of Christmas? We begin to kind of develop a mindset where what can I give prayerfully, and how can I support those I love in prayer? So those family kind of countdown things that you have, there's the idea of again, reading through the book of Luke and then praying together as a family after that. Allow the scripture to inspire your prayers as you're thinking through Jesus came. Jesus lived out his mission. Jesus died for us. And then how does that inspire us to pray? There's the also the idea of some people want to have projects. Maybe that as a family practice, you make prayer your project. You're writing out, maybe you have family members. And so each day of the month, then you're writing a note and say, Aunt Susan, I prayed for you today, and I just want to let you know that I love you. And that's just something that you send out. I know we're already sending out Christmas cards, but maybe then maybe that becomes part of maybe a little prayer along with that, or a child could write that out, or doesn't always necessarily have to be the mom who's doing all the work.
I can't wait to get into more of this in the second half of our conversation. But for now, could you share the links to finding your book and all of the resources and services you have to offer?
Absolutely. My website is janetmchenry.com, and Praying Personalities, Finding Your Natural Prayer Style is available now for pre-orders through Amazon, barnesandnoble.com, christianbook.com, and other online sellers.
In this second half of our conversation with the wonderful Janet McHenry, we're going to dive into some more practical tips on how to have a prayerful approach to the holidays. Janet, let's get into some more nitty-gritty ways that we can include prayer in our traditions for the holidays and keep it aligned with our personalities.
Right. And we were talking earlier about, some might find it more natural to write out their prayers. And so if that is kind of part of a praying practice that you have already, then maybe you could write out prayers for, Uncle Tony and send that to him in his Christmas card. You could choose, if you are kind of have the more personality who's like more buoyant and outgoing, and you love having Christmas music on all the time, maybe to think about choosing that kind of Christmas music that already is a prayer. Like I'm thinking like Joy to the World, those kinds of Christmas carols that, actually are prayerful in nature, and then allow them to inspire your prayers. Sing together as a family. We used to gather around the piano. My mom would always pray. She would always play all the way through the Christmas Carol book, and there were dozens and dozens, and we'd sing together. If we kind of view some of those as just a prayerful offering to the Lord, that could be a really special family tradition to develop. Even children could use Christmas carols as inspiration for drawings that they might do. And then as you're gifting those to family members, to think of them prayerfully. There's so many different ways that we could really incorporate prayer naturally into our family lifestyle. I think that we we simply forget. I know that as a family, growing up, we always sang in the car. And we had one fun challenge once where we tried to think of Christmas carols. So if the last word was joy, then you have to think of a Christmas carol that starts with joy. And so we'd sing those kinds of things together, to families in the car are always kind of can be a point of tension, but when you're singing together, it's kind of hard to have fights. I love the idea of having a Jesus jar, where you have a collection of, prayerful kinds of offerings there. You're thinking of people who need prayer, challenging the children or other family members to put people's names in there, and then pull out a couple at supper time and pray for those folks. And that kind of really shifts the mentality then from like, what am I going to get? And all those lists, those mental lists that we have and things that we feel like we have to do, to more of a practice of seeing Christmas as holy days instead of holidays. Just a few more ideas for anyone out there wanting to think about how to bring more prayer into the holidays.
Those ideas. And I love that we can just take our traditions and kind of redeem them by adding prayer in some of the time.
Mm-hmm.
That might actually work for gift giving. If you're going to give something, let's all lay our hands on it and pray for that person as we're wrapping that gift. That could be just something that you do alongside your current traditions to make them more meaningful for you, for your families, and for the people that you give it to. Because when you hand that gift over and you say, we all prayed a special prayer over this gift because we love you, it does mean a lot more, doesn't it?
I love that idea, Tina. Yeah. And that it's often a workout to get all those presents wrapped. But if you have that kind of a shift of the, mental shift to be able to think of that person prayerfully, and that's a really great way to pass on a legacy of prayer to your family if they see that as well.
Yeah, anytime a holiday is becoming work, you're forgetting to make it worship, right?
Right.
Any final tips about how to look at the characters that we often see in the Bible story according to their prayer personalities and how we can think about that more deeply?
Right. There are, if you beginning with the book of Genesis, we look at Adam and we see that he was kind of a questioning or a challenge, he and Adam and Eve for the Lord, that we begin to understand that no matter who we are, what our personality is, each of us is not perfect, but God listens. He responds to us. Even Job was more of a thinker. He was a cerebral kind of a prayer. And so he wanted to understand the pain that he was going through. And so he had questions and he explained himself and was using various forms of argumentation. I used to teach argumentation as a high school English teacher. I'm like, oh, very good argument, Job. But basically he just wanted to know why. So no matter how we approach God, whether it's from a cerebral kind of point of view or whether it's more of an emotionally charged kind of perspective or a devotionally kind of offering or even a physical way, even I'm thinking of Joshua. God spoke to Joshua, told him not to worry, not to fear, and Joshua just responded with obedience. He was a physical kind of prayer. So I even think that our acts of obedience, when we know God wants us to do something, that's a prayerful response. God spoke, Joshua answered with obedience. God spoke, Joshua answered with obedience again. And then just to be able to think of our families, each of them, think if you just have a pause and reflection and think about who they are, how has God made them, and to understand that we're not necessarily all going to pray the same. We don't respond the same. We have different ways that we approach problem solving and different ways that we, even approach conversation with each other. And so naturally, the way that we are going to pray is going to be different. Even in a family setting, if that means that you have a couple really introverted kids and you want to have, and you're very buoyant and outgoing and you want to have this prayer time together, that's not going to be a comfort zone for your children or your grandchildren. So to kind of respect that and allow them to just pray in their own silent kind of way. And I think the study has been fascinating. It started with that look in the Bible. It includes some examination of the spiritual gifts as well, and how that can connect with prayer in view of the different ways that God has made us. And so hopefully it frees the reader to find her own natural praying style and not feel as though she has to do what her best friend is doing or what her mom says she should do, but to actually approach God with a manner of prayer that is going to be so natural for her that she begins to understand that she's praying without ceasing throughout her day.
Yes. And I know that it's wonderful that we can all appreciate each other when we see those different styles and we celebrate them and we thank God that we're not all the same and He loves us and our differences. Listen to each other's voices and work together to pray together in respect for those differences, because that's how God hears our voices. He hears them as an orchestra of different sounds, different tunes, different sounds, different sections of that wonderful orchestra of prayer that reaches His voice as music to His ears. And during this time of the holiday season, we can be thankful and celebrate that too, right?
Absolutely.
So how can people get in touch with you and get a copy of your wonderful new book and all of its unique properties?
Folks can get in touch with me through my website at janetmchenry.com, and I'm all over social media too, so you can find me there. People can find Praying Personalities at all the online bookstores, and after February, it will be available in local bookstores as well.
Thank you so much for listening. I hope that all of you were inspired for the holidays to really communicate with God according to your personalities and celebrate the differences in your family by weaving traditions in different ways with prayer. And of course, I also hope that you will hit subscribe and come back for the next episode of Flourish-Meant. Flourish-Meant is part of the Spark Media Network and can be found on the Edify app.